Okay, welcome everybody to our Mid-Columbia Public Relations Society event, Communication Strategy Toolbox. Stacy, are you out there and can you hear me?
I am. Can everyone hear me?
Fantastic. I think we're good. For those who have joined us in the past, this is going to follow a similar format in which Stacy, our presenter today, will run through this fantastic presentation on our strategy toolbox, and I will be watching the chat.
Mike, can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, Andrea, we can hear you. And so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll address the questions ideally at the end of the presentation, unless there's something that's just really, right on point to what Stacy is saying. I might break in, but otherwise I'll track your questions and I'll present them to Stacy at the end of this presentation. So with that, Stacy, how about I turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and to jump into this.
Great. Thanks, Mike and Andrea. So awesome to see so many familiar faces. Cecilia in Arizona and Catherine Mora, many of us know, over in Schenectady, New York. So this is awesome to see everyone. On the next slide, you'll see that Mike and Andrea, so Andrea cannot hear us to know when to change the slides. So Mike, are you, okay. We're going to have a little texting here. Mike and Andrea now this is 2020 continuing into 2021. Mike is going to text Andrea when to change the next slide. So this will be good. All right. So they asked me to share a little bit about me for folks who don't know me. I'm a former newspaper reporter and right out of Central, was a page designer in Bellevue and a Tri-City Herald alumni. In college, I spent a summer at Georgetown and another summer at the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, where the bottom line lesson in both of those fellowships was no matter how good you think you are, there are a lot of people smarter and better than you. And that started, I think, my journey of wanting to always learn and grow. And then I spent 17 years at PNNL in media relations, doing local, regional, and national media, the communications manager for national security, and then in the science organization, EMSL, their user facility. So know a lot of you that way. And then 5 years ago in 2015, late 2015, I left the lab and went to Bechtel, which is a business company that's building and going to bring up to operations the vitrification facility at Hanford. And so on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit briefly about Bechtel and the VIT plant. But Bechtel is a global company. Some of you may have heard of them, but not known what they do. They were one of the initial companies that helped build the Hoover Dam. They built the English Channel Tunnel, Ivanpah, which is the largest thermal solar facility in the world, which is in California. That's there on the right. And one of our projects right now is we're building the mobile launcher that the shuttles launch off of for NASA. And locally, we've been at the waste treatment and immobilization plant, or we like to call it the VIT plant, for the last 20 years. And we have about 3,000 employees, craft and what we call non-manual, desk workers or folks out in the field in construction. And by 2023, we're expected to begin vitrifying nuclear waste from the tank farms. And communication strategy is a big one for us right now. We're in the process of developing and finishing our communication strategy around heating up our first melter, which is what you see on the right side here. And that is one of two melters where the waste is actually going to go and be mixed with other materials and transformed into a form that will be safe for storage and literally, that is our goal this year, is to get to the point where we heat up the first melter. And so then next slide, I'm going to go through the elements of a communication strategy, and what I thought about, as Andrea and I talked about, a title of the presentation today was a toolbox, because most people here have created a communication strategy at some point in the past. You might do it all the time at work. And so, this is really an opportunity. I view webinars like this, a chance to maybe take away one or two nuggets that can be a new tool in the toolbox, a new way of looking at it. And so as we look at these elements here, I want to reinforce, these are elements common in most communication strategies. But what I think is important is that it's not what we do. So these elements are great, but it's really how we do it. How do we work ourselves through each of these elements? And so we'll spend some time talking about that on the next slide. Okay. So one of the most important aspects is, what do you do in the beginning? If I look at that, that funnel there, I'll get to that, but it's one of my favorites that I've used over the years. I'm sure I stole it from someone who's actually on this call. So before we can identify what our communications strategy needs to be and what the goals or objectives might be, we really have to understand the business goals and what do our business partners need from us. It's really about knowing what's going on with the business, why they've chosen the business goals they have, what are the challenges to those, who is most critical to them achieving it, and then what are some of the challenges they anticipate running into. As you're talking with your business partners, I think continuing that conversation through all of the steps, all of the elements of the strategy is critical. I love this quote here: if they weigh in, they will buy in. And so if you get people to give you input, you show them early on that you're really focused on helping them meet their business goals, then you're going to have more of their support throughout the process and in implementation. I do think it's important to have that specific conversation of, as we develop a communication strategy and implement it, when or what would prompt us to revisit our plan? And so would there be changing business conditions that would mean we need to revisit that plan? On this graphic here, I like to say marketing communications helps prep the field. I know at least some of us on this call have had in the past maybe business development executives say, you're in communications, you are not bringing in business. And I think it's okay to say, no, we're not. But what we're doing is we're ensuring that there's enough awareness of our business and this area of our work that by the time you meet with someone to try to make a sale or get them to take action on our behalf, that they're aware. So we're prepping the field so that when a salesperson, let's say, walks into a room, they don't have to introduce the company. They don't have to explain the company. They don't have to build the credibility of the company, because we've helped do that through our efforts. And so that's how I try to explain it to them. All right, next slide. And there was a question in the chat. We will go ahead and share the slides afterward as well, plus the PowerPoint template that I've started using for communication strategy. So you've had that conversation with your business partner on the alignment. The first slide in the communications plan that you'll see I provide is situational analysis. So based on that conversation or multiple conversations you've had with your business partners, you'll be able to show your leadership you understand their world. And so what is the competitive landscape, the political, economic landscape? And, you know, where are your employees at with morale and their ambassadorship? So next. All right. You'll see here on some of these slides, I've put a trap. I was thinking about it. I didn't want to be negative, but the reality is in our jobs, there's a lot of traps we fall into. And these, I've identified these traps typically based on things that I realized later I could have done better or different. So once you have alignment on the business goals and you've understood the situation that you're going to be creating and implementing this communication strategy, it's time to identify what the one or more communications goals or objectives are for this strategy. So the traps, I would say, would be having too many goals, those goals not being specific enough. So that's why I say be merciless in your clarity. So exactly what can communications control? So we can't necessarily bring in business, though I'm sure all of us have examples of when we have. But are we trying to educate someone, inform them, get them to adopt a certain practice or act, like buy something or give us funding? So next slide. All right. So I'm going to spend a little time on target audiences here. And so the trap that I've seen over the years, and I know some of us have probably experienced, is when you talk with your business partners wanting to make everyone happy or feel seen. And so if they say, well, we want all of our business areas to you know, be considered, you know, to be the target of your communication strategy, but there's very limited budget or very limited resources to carry that out, then while it's challenging, it's really in the company's best interest to challenge them, to say, okay, if you didn't have to make everyone happy, or if you didn't need everyone on the leadership team to see themselves in this strategy, who would you really pick? Who or what audience truly needs to be reached in order for the communication goal to be met and therefore the business goal? And then who can you reach directly? And if you do have, let's say, 3 audiences identified, at the end of the day, what's the one that is the most important? I'll make a note here. I think sometimes we have multiple audiences when really you have one audience, but the others are influencers. So people might say, well, the media is an audience. And I would contend it's not the audience, it's an influencer. It's in the sphere of influence or another way of reaching your target audience. But if your goal is, let's say, to bring in money, the media is not going to do that for you, but it might help get information out to the people who would. So I think as you have a conversation with leadership, the questions can be, okay, who truly is your target audience versus who might be influencing them? What are these other audiences actually lower tier or just influencers? So next. So we'll spend some time on the characterization of the audience. So one reason I was excited to see Catherine Mora on here is she and Andrea and others were part of a project I'm going to talk about in a minute. I'm going to go through 2 case studies. And it's through those case studies that I am just really passionate about audience research and characterizing who you're trying to reach. I know over the years, at one point in my career, I asked a national security business development person, you know, your funding clients, what do they read? And I remember the conversation because in the end, it wasn't very helpful for me. And what I've learned over the years is find ways to actually ask your target audience directly. And so it's a trap when we don't ask them directly, and we could. And it's a trap if we assume our leadership knows that audience. So they may think they know that audience, but they're interacting with that audience in a certain way where they may actually not have all of the information we need for our strategy. And so I have information is power here, because having worked over the years with scientists and engineers and people who, you know, like right now are managing major projects, they're trying to gather as much information as they can and data to make decisions. And so the more data we can get, the better, because that helps us make better decisions, but also shows a level of creates a level of credibility in what we're doing in our business partners' eyes. So I think, you know, to understand your audience, asking some basic questions, you know, some of this you can learn yourself, other things you may need to ask them directly. So, you know, what is their, thinking back to that marketing funnel, what is their level of, oh, not yet. If we can go back, asking what is their level of knowledge of your business? What's their perception of your business? You know, so they may have a high perception level, but not actually have a good perception. What motivates them? I know many of us have heard over the years our executives and business partners saying they want to know what keeps their clients up at night. But then how do they get information, formally and informally? How do they want to receive it? And then one of the most important things to help us in this process is identifying the sweet spot of what they need that we offer. And so this is I guess this is a trap that I hadn't mentioned before or included in here is, if we tell them what we want them to do without listening to what they need, then our messages are going to ring hollow and they may not act. They may not do what we need them to. And so this can't be about us. This can't be about saying what we think, targeting them in the way we think. It needs to be all about them. So next slide. And I read an article a few years ago, by the way, and they called it egocentric marketing. I thought that was perfect. You know, how many times have we created strategies and our business partners or even ourselves, you know, making it all about us, talking about our business versus talking about the audience. So when I joined Bechtel in September 2015, they had just conducted their first really thorough communication survey. And they also, Bechtel Corporate paid for a community survey to understand perceptions of Bechtel, but then internally we had done a very thorough survey. The team I inherited had done a survey of really gauging the understanding and level of awareness of different initiatives. And they also asked questions like where they want to get information, what kind of information they want. And it was wonderful. I walked into this job knowing, you know, having all this data on what the community thought of us, all this data on our employees. And it was great because when I got there, I found tons of managers wanted the communications team to develop video. And video was, you know, very popular. It obviously still is, more increasingly popular externally on social media. But our survey showed only 11% of the employees, 11% wanted video. And 2 years later, it was only 9%. And so this is where information was power to me, because as I was meeting with managers in my new role and they were talking about doing videos, I was able to say, well, you know, I understand you want videos, but here's what we've learned from the staff. And the team had conversations and really understood that some of it was because Bechtel's very clear on not using, for us, Department of Energy, government resources for personal use, and people in cubicles, and we have a lot of people in cubicles, didn't want people to think if they were watching a video, they weren't doing their work. And so it was interesting for us to learn this about where employees' thinking was, but also it allowed me to go to managers and say, if you want to do videos, we're happy to help outsource them, and we still do. But we're not going to do it for you because we need to focus our limited resources on the activities that do align with what staff said they wanted. And so the side note here is we are going to do this survey again in the next month or so. And anecdotally, what we've heard over the time of teleworking this past year is people do now want videos because they miss seeing people. And so we have used that anecdotal evidence. It has, been strong enough that we've started doing more videos, and that has really helped with employee engagement. So I'll be very curious what our survey shows in March. All right, next slide. All right, and then just checking. Okay, just looking through the chat real quick. I've got that on another screen here, make sure I'm not missing anything if people have questions. So the second case study, this is the one Andrea and Catherine and others, Julie Fisher, who I think's here, had helped with. And so this is back at PNNL in 2013. And this information I'll just share was presented at the National Association of Government Communicators annual meeting in 2015. So this is all previously presented. If anyone has questions or details, I'm probably not at a liberty to provide more details, but we can connect you with someone who is. So, the goal was, as PNNL being a science and technology powerhouse, was looking to continue increasing its visibility and heightening its reputation. The communications function there was looking at how can marketing communications support those goals. And it was decided to undergo a organizational-wide project that we called the S&T Reputation Project to help accelerate visibility for PNNL with key scientists and engineers around the country, and specifically at the top 25 research universities, or what you call tier 1 universities. And so this was a great exercise and the most in-depth audience research that I've been a part of, where we were able to say, and this is where it was really powerful to be, like I said, merciless in your clarity on goals. It was not to accelerate visibility with the public. It was not even with all universities. It was, who are the most influential, impactful scientists across the country at the top universities in the key areas in terms of the research that the lab has done. And so we immediately were able to say, okay, these top 25 universities, it turns out many PNNL scientists have worked there. And so our first step in audience research was, because, I only knew what I knew about universities from what I heard from scientists and from going to college. That's all I knew. And so it was great. We're going to do this in-depth research. And so we conducted in-person interviews of scientists at the lab who had previously worked at those top 25 universities. And then we looked at scientists with relationships with PNNL, like on external advisory boards, who are with either those top 25 universities, very familiar with, or perhaps a fellow in a national professional society. And so we asked all those questions of, what is life like for university professors? What are their goals? What keeps them up at night? What's a typical day like? Who do they interact with? Who do they rely on for their success? Who are their competitors to their success? You'll see here our little icons. We've got the full professor, the associate professor, the assistant professor, and we really tried to understand what each of them need and what their life is like at those 3 different levels as scientists at universities. So next slide. Okay. So we did learn a lot about those audiences. It was fascinating. Overall, the level of awareness of PNNL was very high. The perception was positive. Is everyone able to hear me? Oh, Andrea's texting, just saying she can. Sorry. What you don't all see is there's all these text messages popping up on my iPad screen of people texting. So, so let's see. We'll take a break. Professional facilitation. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, and acronyms. Yeah, we'll do that. So, so as we looked at this audience, we actually sent out a survey to 4,000 scientists at these top 25 universities in chemistry and biology, which were two key areas of PNNL's expertise and research. And we received more than 500 responses, which the statisticians at the lab said was statistically relevant. And what they learned was the level of awareness was high for PNNL. The perception was positive. Full professors had a better understanding of what the laboratory did. But the assistant professors were the ones who had the least knowledge of exactly what the laboratory did. And so we were able to really better understand this audience. And then we looked at, what did they need from us at the laboratory that they couldn't get elsewhere. And so I think it's really important as you go to develop your messages for communication strategy, once you learn about the audience and then you understand what they really need to be successful. In this case, you can hone those messages. So again, information is power. In one experience in my career, we had messages developed based on what we learned about an audience. And one of the executives really wanted to change a message to use language that person often used. We knew that that wouldn't resonate, but us as a communications practitioner saying, we don't think that will work, isn't always the best way to push back. Unfortunately, us just saying that may not have enough credibility. And so in that case, I went back to the members of the audience that I knew and calibrated that potential change to the message. And their answer was straight up, that is not good. That will not resonate. And so, part of our job as communicators is to provide counsel and really make sure our leaders know the truth. At the end of the day, it's their decision, obviously, if that's how they would want to change a message. But it's our job to make sure they have the data behind that. And so, again, the more you learn about your audience and the more data you gather, the more you can use that in helping your leadership help you make the right decisions. And so with your 3 key messages for your strategy, make sure that you have the proof points as well. So we'll go to the next slide. And so as you're developing that, the messages, then the next step is tactics. And I want to talk a little bit about the tactics and the traps. So one of the challenges I find over the years is really being, like I said, merciless in what we need to do versus what sounds fun. And I say that because we are all so creative and there are so many cool and fun things we could do. There's new social media apps, so Clubhouse has just, suddenly become much more popular and people are joining that. I joined it this week. That, I want to understand what apps are out there. How are people communicating? But we have to be merciless in making sure that we pick tactics for our strategy that will truly help us reach that goal. And so sometimes that could be as boring as your leadership sending a handwritten note to someone in that target audience. That's not fun and exciting. It doesn't sound very 21st century, but What if that is one of the most effective tactics you could do? And so I also would say, really try to focus your tactics on what you know is going to reach your audience best and most of your audiences together. And I'll get into that a little bit more. I have a note here about engaging your leaders in the brainstorming. So back to what I said in the beginning about making this a participative process. When you have developed your messages, you'll need your leadership to weigh in on those. When you get to developing tactics, this can be a great step where you meet with your leadership or senior leaders and you say, here's all of the audience research we've done. Here's all of the information we've gathered. Now, based on that data, what are the different tactics we could take? And so this is a great way for them, again, to weigh in so that they buy in, because many of the tactics, whether you've had the idea or they have, you're going to need their help to implement them. So for an example, for that S&T reputation project, one tactic was as simple as take all the information from these disparate websites that is of interest to them and put it on a single page. And so then you are continually sending them to one place. And so I think that's really important to ask yourselves, what are all the things you need to do or could do? What are some of the basic materials you might need? Like you might need a web landing page, you might need a fact sheet. But then, really looking at, hey, if 11% of your employees don't want video and they are your target audience, then don't do video, even if that is exactly where you would expect to be in 2022. So next slide. Let's see. All right, so you'll see this in the template that we send afterward. It's just the example of that audience matrix. So as you gather all this information on your audience and you kind of filter it up to the most important for each, I like to have a slide that I present to leadership of just here's the several different audiences we have, or if it's internal employees as one audience, maybe we break it down. And then what do we know about them and what's the goal? So a couple of examples here. So for employees, if we were to say this for employees at the Hanford Vit plant, our survey that the team had done showed they prefer to hear directly from managers, which I think is pretty universal across industries. And they have a positive view of management's transparency. During telework, they're overloaded with email, and they're concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to telework after COVID. So those may be key things that you want to make sure your leadership knows as you go to communicate this strategy to them. So next slide. So this is one of my favorite slides to include in a communication strategy, and that's of all the tactics you've created, lay them out and be able to identify which ones reach which audiences. And when you lay it out in this kind of format, you can see that most of these are meeting more than one audience. So again, whether that's sub audiences, or if this is a very broad strategy with, several audiences, like here it's 4, you can say, okay, the social media, we know we're reaching 4. So I highlighted that because that's a great example of social media typically doesn't cost as much as other things like advertising above it. So you might have an advertising campaign that would reach all of these audiences, but it might cost $100,000. Whereas, maybe you have half of a social media, half of an FTE dedicated to social media, and it costs half as much. So, really looking at, as you prioritize tactics and resources, who you're able to reach and what's that return on investment. Others, if you have an internal daily electronic newsletter, we have one, it only reaches one audience, but it's so critically important to do, there's no way we would not do it. So those are just some examples. And then next slide. Measurement. I didn't fill this out with any specifics, but obviously you need to be able for your team to know what your, I think we're going to go back here. Yeah. Well, for measurement, you need to be able to say for the individual tactics, you know, how do you know if it's working? How do you know if people are reading your electronic newsletter, whether it's internal, external, and if they're opening it? Interestingly, on MailChimp, I can see people open a newsletter edition 10 times, but what that means is they forwarded it and someone else has opened it. So you now know those are great people to be reaching out to, because not only are they receiving it and opening it, but they're making sure other people see it. Some of you might be on this call even, so thank you for doing that. And then daily internal news, I know at Bechtel, we use Polite Mail. I'd be curious what other people use and what kind of success you've seen. But you can see not only have they opened it, but how long did they spend reading it? And if they opened it more than once. So next slide. Schedule. I gotta say, as a communicator, I don't like schedules. I don't like Excel sheets. I don't like doing schedules. I like being able to say, I'm gonna write that on the day I feel like writing that, not the day it has to get written. But that's, you know, that's not how the world works for us, and in particular not at an engineering construction company like Bechtel. So it's really important for you, your team, but then also your leadership to know, when are you gonna work on something? When is it gonna launch? What's needed of them in that time frame in order to meet that schedule? When activities will end, and then who's on point for those. One of the traps here is not holding people accountable, not holding myself accountable. I know for me, having started as a newspaper reporter, I need a deadline. So if something's 6 months away, or like these presentations, you know, don't assume I'm going to have it done until right beforehand. So that is one of the challenges I've seen, is especially with creatives, is now we have to have a schedule, and that's especially important when your business partners, you're giving them updates, reporting out, and really trying to make sure they understand the value of what you're doing and that you're getting it done when you said you would. So next slide. So the next two slides are, oh, such fun areas. I'll go through it quickly, make sure we have time, plenty of time for questions, but resources. I bet if I asked everyone to raise their hand, you would all raise your hands that you've been given more to do with either the same amount or less, asked to do a strategy, deliver on a strategy, but not given more resources to do so. So these can be the tough conversations. And so as you put together a strategy, one of the benefits of the participatory process is then when it comes to really looking at what will it cost to deliver this strategy, you can go back and say, hey, those same people who wanted to do a special workshop, well, that's going to take another half FTE. So as we talk about resources with our business partners and leadership teams, you know, we can say this tactic everyone really thinks will be highly successful, but here's the resources needed for it. Or if we don't get new resources, we need you to agree that these other things will not happen. It's easier, much easier, we all know, to say that than to do that. But this here is a critical conversation. It also is when you might have people say, well, this is a point we have to revisit the communications plan. So I said that in the beginning. No, what are those gates you run into where you may need to revisit it? And one of those is if you've reduced resources and then you have new leadership come in or new priorities, and they want to start inserting some of those activities or tactics back in, that's going to be another point where you need to turn to them and say, let's talk dollars then. So next slide. So risk. I love including this in a communication strategy because this is where you say, I and my team are not going to do it alone. and here's what we need from everyone else to make sure we're successful. And again, if people in leadership have participated throughout the process, this is an easier conversation. And it's also one that they can own. So if you look at what are the risks to this communication strategy and its implementation being successful, the risks could be the leaders not actually supporting it, even if they said they did, or not providing the level of attention or endorsement needed. So your top leadership may have bought into it, but as you go to flow it down to their teams and need things from their teams, like information or meetings to understand what's coming or reviews of products, if those people don't consider it important and their top leadership have not set that expectation to support you, then that is a risk. Obviously, lack of resources. Your customers' expectations may change. If it's, let's see, like for us, you have a new administration coming in, do their expectations change? And if so, how does that impact what you're doing? And then external changes. If 2020 didn't prove to us we cannot control anything, I'm not sure what would. And I say that as a control freak being really challenged with not controlling the world. And so as you talk through these risks, then you can say, okay, here's the risks. Here's who could help us prevent these risks. Here's how we can mitigate against them. And so to me, this is just a powerful conversation and a chance to get everyone's total final buy-in. So if they love the strategy, if they see how you're going to support the business goals, that you are a part of the team, you are an equal in understanding what needs to be done for that organization to be successful, then we all own the risks together. And you're raising these to make sure that, that we are successful. So I think this is just a really important one. And so then that's my last slide. Just wanted to say thank you. And we've got plenty of time for questions. It looks like there's only one question, but I hope there's more. Oh, I should say there's a second question. And I'll go ahead and answer that one first. And that came in from some folks. Thanks for responding on to my social media appeal of any questions people might have. And that question was really around products like Constant Contact, MailChimp, and for us at Bechtel at the Vit Plant, we have an electronic newsletter. We are in the process of in the next month or two doing a community survey. So again, a few of you on here might receive that, asking how you want to receive information, what you want to know, if anything, about what we're doing. One of the challenges, and this question was related to that, was by the time you put out that newsletter, you have so much content, some of it, old. It might have gone out as a news release before, and now it's being amplified or curated into this monthly newsletter. It might reach some of your audience, but I know the spam filters are very powerful for those products. So if anybody's on the line who would want to add something in the chat, we can hear from you, but what you're using. But I would say in response to that question, first look at who you're trying to reach, go back to that audience piece, because maybe an electronic newsletter that curates old news is what they need, because maybe they're not going to be looking at the news as it happens. Or maybe they don't need a monthly newsletter, or maybe they want a personal email. Maybe the best thing to do is to break that audience down from Constant Contact and put them in tiers. So who do we want to have a general awareness, and this is the perfect way to reach them? Who are the decision makers? So if you're with a city, do you need the ports to know about you? For us, there's groups externally like Hanford Communities that pay attention to the Vit Plant and to Hanford. And so how could we be keeping those people in the loop? And maybe the newsletter is not what we need to do. Or maybe we need to take that newsletter and send it to them individually, to those 10, 15 people, with a personal note every month when that newsletter comes out. So I would definitely, in any question about the product or tactic, go back first to who are you really trying to reach and what do you want from them? And then ask yourself, is that tactic the right way? And if so, then what's the most efficient and effective way to get it to them? So that's it for that. What, Mike, do you want to jump in with our other question?
That's right. So did you, the one question we have up here right now is, do you find professional facilitation helpful for bigger and or important meetings? And this is one from Kylie, who adds that the TBI Council utilizes facilitation. She shared a link with all of us that she has found valuable. Even if it's just having someone there to clarify acronyms is really helpful for her. So what are your thoughts on that, Stacy?
I would say I think it depends on the organization and the, so if you mean like a big meeting, like a government external advisory board or committee, that could be very good. I've seen internal facilitators at larger companies do really well because they know the business and they have some credibility as part of the company. And they may know some of the personalities in the room and help really make that a more meaningful facilitation. So, and then frankly, we've just never really had budget to do external facilitators.
Kylie's going strong with us today, Stacy. She's got a follow-up. And I think a lot of us can commiserate with this. She says her team gets very frustrated with some people doing a reply all when they feel like it's not necessary to reply all. Do you have any advice for that? How to talk about this and address each person's needs and wants?
I'm just reading this here. My initial thought is pick your battles. If the team members are frustrated about that, I would ask, why are they frustrated? Why would they feel, this is almost like a psychological counseling answer, but why would they feel that their way is right? Or was there some truth in the email that they didn't like and would rather not have had everyone see? So I think that's more of a, what's going on with them personally that they would be frustrated about that. I would say if that's a tough conversation or a tough customer, if you will, it's probably best to pick up the phone and have a conversation with them about whatever they put in that reply all. And then if you have a great conversation and come to agreement, you could write back to everyone and say, thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate better understanding, your message below, and we're, committed to working with you to make sure that gets done, or whatever that is. But if people are getting, in my time in life, when I've been really frustrated at emails, it's usually because I need to check myself a little bit. So.
Sure.
Right.
Sounds like a good deal of judgment's involved too. We've got a quick one from Gracie who says, do you translate any of your communication pieces?
We have not needed to on our project, but Bechtel Corporate does. So we have projects all around the world on most continents going on at any one time. And so right now, I know our leadership messages, anything coming from corporate to all employees is translated into at least one other language, Spanish.
Okay. One from Elsie who says, thanks for the great talk. Her question is, how far out do you plan? Do you usually create quarterly communication plans, annual plans, monthly, or all of the above, or does it depend?
Well, I think it definitely depends on what the goal is. I've learned that every time I've done a plan out more than 1 year, it very quickly becomes overcome by events. And I think most of us probably run into that. So this communication strategy we're doing is just until December. What's great is, because we have a specific goal. We're going to support our team building the energy, excitement, and understanding needed for a successful heating up of that first melter I mentioned earlier. But as we get closer to that, we're also going to be revamping that, maybe 3 months before that, because once that melter's turned on, the job isn't done. And so we really need to be starting to message ahead or after that. There's a great book by Patrick Lencioni. I can't remember which one it is now, but he talks about the importance of having a rallying cry. And those are best 6 to 9 months out. So I would say the most impactful communications goal is one you can reach in the next year. So.
Okay, great. It sounds like planning is a year-round process. Kylie comes back again, and she wants to know if you have any facilitation tools for those internal facilitators, such as websites, worksheets, apps, particularly to help someone prepare for staff meetings, trainings, etc.
Not necessarily facilitation tools, but I've found our company, I was amazed, really impressed when I joined Bechtel of how much material is provided to help managers. So if there's a big issue coming up, what are some talking points they can use in answering questions from staff? Our HR department, it doesn't even have barely any communication support, but puts together tremendous talking points, fact sheets, guides to help us in conversations with staff. I know P&L, from having been there, had some great tools as well that they did, but I'm not as familiar with facilitation tools.
Okay. Before our next question, a good presentation comment from Jay Freeman. Thank you, Jay. Here's one from Julie Stacy. Great info. At Bechtel, does the communications team share their plans with each other? Because she finds it's hit and miss where she's at, and seems to be proprietary by the person who created it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, in fact, we're a global company, but like I spent half an hour yesterday with 2 people at our business unit in London, half hour yesterday morning, just talking with them about some of the activities that we're doing. And so the only time there's a concern with sharing is if ours is since WTP is a government project, if we want to share that with other entities that might not only be Bechtel, can we do that from a information clearance perspective? But yes, we share all the time. One of the, I should have mentioned it, Bechtel's building the only nuclear power plant being built in the US right now for Georgia Power in Georgia. And the communications director there and I talk frequently. We just email, what are you guys finding is working with craft? What issues are you running into? A couple of years ago, electricians were really hard to find. And so they came to us and said, what's worked for you for communicating? So there is no sense of ownership, number one. They're paying me. So I don't, if I did it on my own time, maybe I would own it. But I think the more you share with other people, Catherine Lang, who many of you people know, years ago gave me one of the best pieces of advice. The more you share, the more power you have. And I don't mean that like power wielding power, but when you hold information close, you actually weaken your position. When you share it, you're strengthening your position because you're helping others learn. They're going to want to help you learn. And I just think the more we can share, the better. And I'm happy to share what we do because, none of it's really proprietary. So.
Thank you, Stacy. We're at the end of our time rope here. Can I tell folks that we'll be able to share your slides with them?
Yes, we'll share the slides, and then we'll also, I'll take the individual slides that we use in our strategy template without all of my miscellaneous stuff and share that with Mike and Andrea. And then if people have questions afterward, feel free to email me and we'll send my email as well. I love having conversations with people because I know I'll learn something from you. And then definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a great place for us to stay in touch too.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Stacy. I want to remind everyone to please stay tuned for our March speaker, which is TBD. We will get that announced shortly, and you'll all receive a survey about what you'd like to see in our upcoming speaker topics, whether you're a member or one of what we call our associates, or what I call one of our chapter groupies. We love that you're out there, and we want your feedback. Any final thoughts, Stacy?
Well, I would just say it's so awesome to see everyone come together like this. And I have had so many people who are on this call be a part of my learning and what I've been able to share and learn and give back today. So stay in touch and just thank you. Thanks. And just love seeing all your faces.
All right. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. Goodbye, everybody. Stay safe, be well. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye.